First steps on my 7th continent. Welcome to Antarctica. Here's the welcoming party. Hi guys. Over 90% of that ice around Antarctica has disappeared in less than a decade, and the trend line is really disturbing because it makes the glaciers that hold all the land ice in place.
I never imagined that you could see glaciers this big disappearing in such a short time. When I started the Extreme Ice Survey, climate change was still seen as a pretty abstract thing. It was something that was going to happen 20 or 30 or 50 years from now. And my God, when you could start to realize, no, it's happening right now, right in front of us, it put a real marker in time to say, this is now, this is real.
Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Jonathan Capehart, Associate Editor at The Washington Post. You're about to meet two men, one a photographer, the other a reporter, who have used their powerful storytelling to chronicle how a changing climate is impacting the world. But today, our conversation is about warming temperatures, how they are impacting Antarctica. Please welcome photographer James Balog and CNN Chief Climate Correspondent Bill Weir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, James, you've captured some of the most powerful images depicting the rapid change in vanishing ice, which we saw in the opening montage. What do those images tell us about global climate change, specifically its impact on the continent of Antarctica?
Yeah, well, we are a species that looks for patterns and likes to tell itself stories about the patterns. And the patterns are what science does. Science is a discipline of finding the patterns out there in the world, and art is a medium through which we tell ourselves stories about what those patterns are all about. And so when I, as a photographer, was out there looking at ice, really as an aesthetic, subjective, emotional response to the world that I saw changing around me, it collected this visual evidence that people could understand. It wasn't about charts and graphs and statistics. It was real and it was immediate and it was tangible for people who were not educated in hardcore quantitative science. The critical story about Antarctica is that there are two particular places in Antarctica where the ice is very unsteady. One is in the Antarctic Peninsula, which is that long finger that sticks up from the main body of Antarctica towards South America. And the other part is down to the west of that, called West Antarctica. And there are very, very big glaciers there that are unsteady and unstable and in the process of getting broken up by the warming ocean. It's basically underneath that ice. It's an archipelago of islands that's capped by the ice, which is on the land and floating on the water. So as that breaks up, large quantities of frozen water can wind up in the ocean. And that's been so far amounting to about 150 billion tons of ice per year is coming out of the Antarctic ice sheet and being added to the global ocean.
Bill, you've been to Antarctica. We saw your excitement arriving for your first visit. How is what does the continent capture about both nature's wonders and the peril facing our planet today?
It is, Jonathan, hands down the wildest place I've ever been on 7 continents. I describe it as sort of Alaska on steroids. You know, you go to where I met Jim at the Mendenhall Glacier. There's the glacier. You go down there, it's like there's a glacier and another. You're surrounded, and it's just the biggest, most expansive, wildest place you've ever seen. And then experts who have spent more time than a few minutes, explain to you, yeah, there shouldn't be rainbows here. There should not be waterfalls coming off these glaciers. This is supposed to be a frozen desert, but it is melting at such a rate that has exceeded even the expectations of scientists a decade ago. And I don't know what wakes us up at a certain point. James showed me these pictures of the Mendenhall Glacier, and how they've shrunk like a mattress, like a guest air mattress that you just deflate when they leave. And you'd think that those pictures would be enough to wake people up to avoid the worst. But then this summer, people in Juneau, just downhill from that glacier, woke up with 3 feet of freezing water in their living rooms. It's called a glacier lake outburst flood, or GLOF. This is a new part of our climate change vernacular.
Wait, say that again? GLOF.
GLOF, G-L-O-F, Glacier Lake Outburst Flood. And there are millions of people living under glaciers, especially in the Himalayas. And maybe it's an earthen dam keeping them from all that ticking time bomb, melting water, drip by drip that's coming down. And so what I left Antarctica with was just awe and wonder times 10, both the fear and the fascination. But Antarctica also gives me hope. It's the one place that represents scientific consensus. Nobody owns it. All the nations of the world said it's going to be there for peace and science. The comeback of the humpback whale, which I went down there to study with whale scientists, is a modern conservation miracle. We almost wiped them out when I was born, and then in my lifetime, we had one whale swim within a mile of Times Square, come up the Hudson River, because the cleaning up the Hudson has been so successful relative to toxic days past. But I wish everybody could go, and I wish you could see with your own eyes the rate at which these are changing, and talk to folks who know it really well about what they fear about. And I also got an amazing lesson from a penguin. Some of the ones I met down there, we're watching them make nests, and the father goes and collects pebbles to build the nest, and then the mama chick, sits on the chicks historically in some species. But what broke my heart is they're making these nests, and they explain to us, well, these chicks, these babies will never survive the winter because it's way too late for nesting season. There was an unusually warm spring. It brought a lot of snowfall. Penguins need bare rock to nest. And so some species, like chinstrap penguins, are trying to hatch their eggs in standing water. They just hadn't adapted. But Gentoo penguins, this one particular species, really flexible. They're moving their nests. They're going further south. They're finding the cold spots. They're being adaptive. And as a result, their numbers are skyrocketing while the other species are crashing. And the scientists who study them say, there's a lesson for us in that. The humans that are more adaptive, especially on coastal cities and building and putting more mangroves and understanding what's coming, will be the ones that suffer the least.
So James, you're one of those people who has been to Antarctica more than one time. How many times have you been?
6 in Antarctica, about a dozen in Greenland, 25 in Alaska, and on and on and on. So
from your first trip to your last trip, how has the continent changed over the years?
My work has been focused on the peninsula. And in some parts of the peninsula, you see the ice retreating and being stagnant right where the ice has come up out of the ocean and it's parked on the edge of the land. We actually just had a time-lapse camera just this year that showed a big tongue of ice coming out from the mountains and laying out on the water where there hasn't been ice floating on the water for a long time. Don't know how long it'll last out there, but it's a variable place, and it's a function of how things change winter to winter, how the sea surface temperatures change, and I think the overall condition of the area that we've worked in is that the ice has retreated very, very significantly in the past 70 years. We know that from the mapping that the British Antarctic Survey did in 1950.
When we were talking in the green room earlier, you mentioned that you have concerns about the Arctic. You didn't want to just talk about Antarctica, that there's something with the 2 poles. What is that? Talk about that.
Well, I think in the context of what we're concerned about here as a community, we should be thinking about both polar regions, Antarctica and the Arctic, And there's a third place, the mountain glaciers. So in Greenland, there's two big ice sheets. One is Antarctica, the other one is Greenland. And if Antarctica is losing about 150 billion tons a year, Greenland is losing about 290 to 300 billion tons of ice per year. And the mountain glaciers, which span the world, the high altitudes of the world, from the Himalaya to Pakistan, to the European Alps, to the islands up in the Canadian Arctic, and on over to Alaska, the mountain glaciers are losing just about the same amount that the Greenland ice sheet is losing. So in aggregate, mountain glaciers, Greenland, and Antarctica, we're losing somewhere around 750 to 800 billion tons of ice per year. And that's a huge number. I don't even know what the hell it means. We've tried analogies all over the place. You probably
The one
have
I
too.
use is, since I was born, Earth has lost ice the size of the United States 15 feet thick.
Ooh, that's a good one.
That's a good one,
I like
right?
that,
So you can
yeah.
picture like a 15-foot ice crust on the continental U.S.
Did you do that math?
I got that one from a scientist. I said,
Okay,
I'm keeping
good.
that. I'm keeping that. But the other one that I was throwing around those sort of metaphors just this week on CNN as we talked about new science that was just released from the Antarctic Survey. This is a team from the UK, US, around the world. They spent 6 years trying to get under the Thwaites Glacier, which is a frozen hunk of ice the size of Florida, a mile thick. And if that alone melts, it'll raise sea levels by 2 feet. And that's just one glacier in West Antarctica. And it also serves as sort of a cork, which holds back a lot of the land ice inland there. And so nobody knows. So when they took this torpedo-shaped robot called an ice fin, and they drill these really long holes down to the ice and get up under it, there was worry at a time that what would happen is that these big sheer walls, as the ocean got them, they would just start to fall like this and collapse, and then the ones behind them would be even more vulnerable, and they would collapse, and it would be like this dominoes going. But when they got under it, they realized the ice is sort of on a stair step up under the glacier. The warm water of the Southern Ocean is creeping up under and miles inward. And the title of this report after 6 years had the word grim in it, in the title. Grim findings, which is, they say, it's just going to get faster and deeper. And so it's a matter of time. We can't reverse this. This is baked in. This is the laws of physics. If everybody switched to skateboards tomorrow, we still can't built in the slow motion physics of 150 years of all this fossil fuel pollution. The best we can hope for is to slow that melt down to give our coastal cities time to adapt, to put more mangroves where they're helpful, to prepare coastal cities, but also, like I talked about, the glofs. Even folks way inland aren't safe on this changing planet. So if we think too much about, well, this is just a coastal problem, we're missing the big picture, I think.
So you anticipated the question I was going to ask you, Bill, which was, is there anything that can be done to reverse this? And you say flat out no. So then what can be done to protect not just coastal cities around the world, but I guess inland cities as well? What are those mitigating things that can be done?
Well, right now, Charleston is building $1 billion seawall around the historic part of that city, but that would only protect 20% of the population. And that's one city, $1 billion, right? New York has a plan in place that many scientists say by the time it's finished, it'll be too late, it'll be obsolete. A lot of the big mitigation, like the Mose project in Venice, Italy, to keep them is kind of obsolete by the time you finish it, because things are happening. The Earth we grew up on is gone now. And that's really hard to come to grips with. The laws of physics that we grew up with don't apply anymore. We live on a completely different Earth than the one we were born to, and we're not sure how everything works on this new one. So there's these hugely complex systems that are connected to all of this. The Greenland ice sheet, as it melts, it puts a lens of fresh water on top of the Atlantic, which sinks this big conveyor belt that goes down to the Caribbean and goes up past the UK and controls all those currents in the Atlantic. If that breaks, we're talking about massive losses in fishing and differences in climate. There have been movies, sort of apocalyptic movies, made about that sort of thing. But it's a real possibility. And the best we can do is try, I think, the scientists tell us the best we can do is just burning our fuel as fast as fairly as possible. And then if we can stabilize the parts per million of heat-trapping gases, carbon dioxide, methane, these sorts of things, the temperature will stabilize. And so now the goal is to hold it at a certain temperature and don't let it go out of control.
James, I would love if you have any reaction to what Bill just said before I go to an audience question that is actually for you. But I mean, Bill, you made me gasp, and I'm sure other people in the audience gasped when you said, the Earth we grew up on is gone now. James?
Yeah, before I answer that, I want to mention one thing about this sea level rise, because when we talk about billions of tons of ice, it sounds really abstract. The global sea level average is going up about 1/8 of an inch per year in the ocean, which doesn't sound like much. But there are many places where it's actually raising or rising more than that because of the way the ocean currents and the winds pack the water up against the continents. One of those hotspots happens to be the east coast of the United States, especially from Florida up to Virginia. We did a film in 2018 called The Human Element that had a big scene that was shot in Chesapeake Bay in Norfolk, Virginia, where all that action is happening. And they're having their streets flooded almost every month during the high tides already. So it's a big deal. And over the course of, what is it now? Let me just check my notes here to make sure I get this right. We've had 4 inches of average global sea level rise since 1992, 8 to 9 inches since 1880. And that's the averages. The other places, like the east coast of the US, it's more than that. So that amounts to about 1 inch for every 7 years. And you don't have to add that up across very many years before you get another foot in New York and another 2 feet in New York. So to your question, I got this analogy in my head. I just turned 72 the other day.
No way.
Happy birthday.
You're doing great, man.
I feel old and
This is
creaky.
why you should spend all your time on glaciers.
Right.
But as I was on the plane coming here, I was reflecting on how, you know, your mind says that you're still that guy who was 30 years old.
Exactly.
You know, that's what the story you're telling yourself. But your joints and your doctor are telling you that you're a different creature. You know, you've left that old guy behind, that earlier person behind, and you're a different person now. You're changing shells, different realities, and that's really what the Earth is doing. I'm totally with you on that. I did a book a few years ago called The Human Element, a time capsule from the Anthropocene. And the Anthropocene is this term that has been given to our period of time in geologic history, although that's still debated, and you've heard all about that. Essentially, we're living in an altered state. How do we feel about an altered state? I've struggled with that a lot, and I suspect everybody in this room has. You know, you're inclined to sink into a certain amount of angst and despair and frustration. You know what the world should be, and the world isn't that. Because the tides of history and technology and finance are not reacting fast enough to the urgency of the moment. And, you know, I was raised as a young person on reading Henry David Thoreau and holding that up as the gospel. And in some little corpuscle in my head, that still is the gospel. And I've been wrestling with that. What do you do with it? And I finally realized from reading and thinking about environmental history, you know, it's not as bad as it seems. That we have not actually been living in a pristine world for hundreds of thousands of years. Homo sapiens has been changing this planet for a really long time, ever since we invented fire. Now, of course, the rate of change has accelerated a lot in the past 50 to 100 to 200 years. But what I tell myself now is the world has changed, the world has always changed, and somehow we will keep muddling through. It'll be more expensive, there will be a lot of crises, there will be a lot of problems, but somehow this cockamamie crazy race called Homo sapiens will muddle through and get by. I certainly don't believe in the doomsday scenarios that are so common in the book publishing and TV world these days. I don't think it's anything you should be slashing your wrists about.
Okay. So James, here's the question. The question from Olgi in Oklahoma. Olgi asks, how can the integration of information technologies in the Arctic region be accelerated to enhance connectivity and monitoring? And what are the main challenges in adapting these technologies to such remote and environmentally sensitive areas? We've got 6 minutes left, and there's this one question I've got to get into Bill before we end. So what's your answer to Olgi?
Yeah, I think we need some bright 23-year-old IT people to mess with that. That's beyond my pay grade.
Wow, that was shorter than I thought you were going to go. Okay, Bill.
We got these guys laughing in here. There hasn't been a lot of laughing all afternoon.
Oh, you just wait. Here comes the question, Bill. You've written a series of letters to your son on Earth Day every year since he was born, and that has since turned into your first book, Life as We Know It Can Be. In the most recent letter, you say that, quote, so much has happened that I wake with more wonder than worry. So I want you to unpack that for the audience.
Sure.
And explain why whale poo is one of the things that gives you hope. Whale poo?
Whale poo,
I
yes.
mean, whales are huge, so I'm frightened.
Well, let me start with
means.
the whale poo. One thing we didn't appreciate, this is a minke whale we met in the Antarctic Peninsula, came right up. He's probably the first humans he'd ever seen.
And he's probably turned on his side
He
with
is.
his eye up so he can look at the boat and see what's happening.
Exactly. And those are diatoms, as they're like, sort of an algae on him there, which means he probably did not migrate. So he's been down there, probably didn't see any humans. But we didn't realize when the whaling industry devastated 95% of the big baleen whaling stocks in the world, we didn't realize we were killing the ocean's fertilizer pumps. Because when a whale goes down to take a deep breath, which you don't realize the pressure, they can't poo down there. So when they come up for a breath, they release fertilizer by the acre. And within a day, the sea life that comes and is drawn to that, it is the building block of the ocean. It's where the plankton feeds. That feeds the krill, which feeds the whales and the seals and the penguins and all the way on the food chain. Sir David King, the UK's former climate envoy, who's now at Oxford and has the Center for Climate Repair, or Cambridge, don't want to mix those up, at Cambridge, he's arguing we should use volcanic ash as a stand-in for whale poo and seed the oceans to try to bring back this biomass and bring back the health of the oceans. They tried that before with iron filings. It set off these algae blooms, so that's a controversial thing, but they're doing test projects around. But in answer to your question, Jonathan, my son was born at the height of the pandemic in 2020, and I was looking out at a world in lockdown thinking, my kid is gonna live to see the 22nd century, you know? And in the first 4 years of his life now, so much has happened. The Inflation Reduction Act was passed, which uncorked all of this excitement among the climate entrepreneurs that I talked to, the professors, the field scientists. Suddenly, people are taking this seriously. And there are industries nobody's even talked about that are the next billion-dollar industry. Thermal batteries. This is basically a hot rock in a box that's hot enough to make steel or heat cities. The steam you see coming out of the streets in New York, right now it's made with dirty fuel oil. Soon it could be made with a hot rock in a box, heated up by a windmill somewhere off of Long Island somewhere. Within a few years, there is so much potential, so much happening that we're just not talking about yet. And the other thing that gives me hope is something called pluralistic ignorance. A few years ago, some researchers from Boston College and Princeton and other places asked a bunch of Americans, guess what percentage of your fellow Americans care about climate and doing something about it? And regardless of party, most people guess between 30 and 40%. In reality, it's 66 to 80%. You are surrounded by allies you don't even know you have because people don't want to talk about climate change at a cocktail party or a drop-off. You don't want to be the downer. But if we change the way we talk about it, we remember Dr. King, of course, for calling out the nightmare, but we remember I Have a Dream because he painted a picture of a better future. And so maybe the talk is, hey, did you see Oakland? They got all electric school buses now. So no more diesel fuels, And then they plug the school into the bus as a battery and light things up after night. Wouldn't it be cool if we got some of that? There's all these better ways, more sustainable, healthier, happier, without missing a beat in comfort levels in many cases. So what gives me hope is that we are made of stories. Everything in our lives, borders, currencies, corporations are just stories we agree upon in the moment. They're under constant revision. The political parties of our lifetimes, you're seeing how they're being constantly revised based on personalities or changes or stories as they shift. And the idea that people could start rowing in the same direction to create a healthier earth for all of us, it's doable. It's right there. It's just a matter of us telling better stories.
So now that I know what whale poo is all about, because when I saw the question, I was like, wait, what is that? So whale poo is fertilizer, and when you talked about it, I don't know, I'm sure you all saw the front page of that other publication, but it is the hometown paper here, the New York Times, where it has the front page, bold plan would turn the world's oceans into carbon busters. And it says it's this machine that will grind up limestone inside a tall green silo and release the powder into the nearby West River Picatoo, creating a chalky plume that should dissolve within minutes. The effect could be potent, scientists say. Rivers contain carbon dioxide that is constantly escaping into the air, where it traps heat and warms the planet. But adding limestone converts some of that carbon dioxide into a stable molecule that instead stays underwater and washes into the sea, where it should remain trapped for thousands of years.
Yeah. This is similar to rock weathering, where if you put certain rock on a beach or on a farmer's field, it draws down carbon. It's just one of many nature-based solutions that are out there that people are super excited about. Biochar is another one. There's these invasive weeds in India. You char them, put them on farm fields. They not only regenerate soil, but they lock away carbon. All kinds of ideas like that.
And I want to pick up that thread also. I was maybe a little bit too pragmatic and resigned in my previous answer about reasons for hope. And I think the technology and the community response, both of those things are reasons for hope. I read this stuff constantly, as I'm sure you do. And I mean, every time you open up any one of a number of websites or whatever, there's some new technology like this, this limestone business where you go, yeah, okay, that's brilliant. And these things take a long time to get up to scale. But the fact of the matter is that human ingenuity is a really, really, really powerful engine. And we have this ability to rejigger things if and when we get the right social and financial signals, and there are a lot of good choices out there that will take us into the next world. Jennifer Morgan talking about 60% of the German electrical grid a couple hours ago. 60% of the German electrical grid is renewable. It's mind-boggling.
Not exactly the Sunshine State either.
Yeah,
Germany.
exactly. Yeah.
No, exactly.
And it's fantastic. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that I take a lot of heart from when I'm feeling kind of down in the dumps is to realize that we live in a community of like-minded people and like-minded energies and like-minded intellectual passions. You know, frankly, I grew up as an individualistic, young, adolescent American. I was out climbing mountains on my own with one or two partners for a good bit of my early life, and I thought you had to do everything on your own. Well, the fact of the matter is, as I'm certainly a lot older and maybe a little bit wiser, I realize that we do things in communities, and we're here today because we're in a community, and that gives us power, and it gives us potential and capability, and that's ultimately one of the key things that will move the humankind forward into a better behavior in relationship to the planet.
Mm-hmm. And I think even in an election year, if you can't agree with your neighbor on which yard sign they have there, you can't agree on the hiking trail or the fishing hole that you love. You can discuss the changes that you've seen just in your own lifetimes and what leads to that and how we can be better stewards of this beautiful planet. We're all in this together. Sometimes I say sadly, but we are all in this together.
Bill, in the 43 seconds that we have left, I can't let you go without asking you real quickly a question about the Amazon, which you've spent years covering. Right now, there are wildfires have reached new highs across huge parts of South America. Real quickly, what's at stake, especially with regard to the biodiversity there?
Biodiversity is massive there. There are probably miracle drugs in those jungles that we've yet to discover. Creatures, our planetary roommates, just the moral obligation to take care of them. Things are much better since Bolsonaro was beaten by Lula da Silva. The fires are down. But one thing to keep an eye on, as big companies know better because their customers called them out, they say, we're not deforesting the Amazon anymore, the Cargills of the world, the Nestles. But then they'll go to the Cerrado, which is another sort of part of Brazil, where the protections are not there, and take advantage of that. So we have to be hyper vigilant as consumers, as citizens, and just really think about, this is a time test, and every tree that old growth tree that's left standing is a win. But there's so much out there, so much energy cooking right now, that I hope confabs like this can fire folks up, fill up their buckets so they can go back into the world and do the work.
Well, I have to say that coming into this conversation, particularly about Antarctica and melting glaciers and ice sheets, I approached this with foreboding. But listening to the two of you, despite sort of the dourness of most of our conversation, there is a lot of optimism and hope coming from the two of you. And so I'm going to leave this stage with that. Photographer James Balog, CNN Chief Climate Correspondent Bill Weir, thank you both very much for being here today.
Thanks,
And please don't go anywhere. My colleague Maxine will be out next with the Climate Envoy from the Marshall Islands. Stay with us.